The vast, sun-baked plains of West Texas stretched endlessly, meeting the horizon in a hazy shimmer. Here, where the wind whispered secrets through the tall grasses and the vultures circled lazily overhead, lay the Bar J Ranch. It belonged to Jebediah Johnson, a man as weathered and rugged as the land itself. Jebediah wasn't born into wealth. He'd carve his empire from the unforgiving earth with calloused hands and a relentless spirit. Years of hard work and shrewd decisions had transformed a small homestead into a sprawling cattle ranch, making him one of the most prosperous men in the county. Yet, despite his success, a profound loneliness clung to him like dust to a worn saddle. His days were filled with the rhythms of ranch life, the bellowing of cattle, the clatter of horseshoes, the shouts of his ranch hands. But his nights were often silent and empty. He was known for his generosity, though he often masked it with a gruff exterior. He'd been burned before, taken advantage of by those who saw only his wealth. So, he kept his emotions guarded, his heart locked away behind a wall of stoicism. Folks around these parts knew Jebediah to be a fair man, quick to offer a helping hand to those truly in need, but slow to trust. His ranch hands respected him, even feared him a little, but they also knew he'd stand by them in a fight. His only companion, besides the loyal ranch hands, was Martha, his cook and housekeeper. Martha had been with Jebediah since his early days, a mother figure and a voice of reason. She knew him better than anyone, saw through his tough facade to the good heart beneath. She'd often chide him about finding a wife, settling down, and filling the ranch with the sound of children's laughter. Jebediah would just shrug and mutter something about being too busy, but Martha knew he secretly longed for companionship. He just wouldn't admit it, not even to himself. The Bar J might be vast, but it felt awfully empty with just him rattling around in it. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the already parched earth into a cracked and dusty landscape. A swirling vortex of sand and grit danced across the plains, growing larger and more menacing with each passing minute. A dust storm was brewing, and it promised to be a bad one. Jebediah squinted at the approaching storm, his eyes narrowed against the glare. He knew the dangers of these storms firsthand. They could strip the land bare, suffocate livestock, and leave a man lost and disoriented in a matter of minutes. He barked orders to his ranch hands, directing them to secure the livestock and take shelter in the barn. As the first tendrils of the storm reached the ranch, a lone figure stumbled into view. It was a woman, her face obscured by a tattered shawl, her clothes covered in dust. She was clearly exhausted, her steps faltering as she struggled against the fierce wind. She clutched something tightly in her arms, hidden beneath the folds of her shawl. Jebediah watched her approach with a mixture of suspicion and concern. He couldn't make out her features, but he could see the desperation in her movements. He hesitated for a moment, remembering his past experiences with strangers. But something about her vulnerability, her obvious distress, tugged at his heart. "Hold up there," he shouted, his voice barely audible above the roar of the wind. The woman stopped, her head lifting slightly. She peered at him through the swirling dust, her eyes wide and pleading. She took a tentative step forward, then another, until she stood just a few feet away from him. "Please," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "I need help. Just a place to rest, out of the storm." Jebediah studied her carefully, his gaze unwavering. He saw the fear in her eyes, the weariness etched on her face. He knew she was running from something, but he couldn't bring himself to turn her away. Not in this storm. Not when she looked so utterly lost and alone. "All right," he said finally, his voice softening slightly. "Get inside. Quick now, before the storm swallows us whole." He gestured towards the main house, then turned to his ranch hands. "Someone get her some water and something to eat, and see if Martha can find her some clean clothes." Inside the main house, the storm raged outside, rattling the windows and howling through the cracks in the walls. Jebediah watched as the woman, who introduced herself as Sarah, gratefully accepted a cup of hot coffee from Martha. She huddled near the fireplace, shivering despite the warmth, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Martha, ever the perceptive one, shot Jebediah a knowing glance. She could see the fear in Sarah's eyes, the burden she carried. Martha, without a word, led Sarah to the bunkhouse, a small, separate building near the main house, usually reserved for visiting ranch hands. It offered more privacy than a room in the main house. "You can stay here for now," Martha said gently, her voice soothing. "It's not much, but it's dry and safe. Get some rest. We'll talk more later." Sarah nodded gratefully, her grip tightening on the bundle she still held protectively in her arms. Jebediah watched them go, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He trusted Martha's judgment, but something about Sarah's secretive behavior bothered him. Later, after ensuring the ranch was secure against the storm, Jebediah found Martha in the kitchen, preparing supper. "What do you make of her, Martha?" he asked, his voice low. Martha sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "She's scared, Jebediah. Terribly scared. And she's running from something, that's for sure." "I figured that much," Jebediah grumbled. "But what? And why here?" "Maybe she just needed a place to hide," Martha suggested. "A place where no one would look for her." "And you think this is it?" Jebediah raised an eyebrow. "A wealthy ranch in the middle of nowhere? Seems like a pretty obvious choice." "Maybe," Martha conceded. "But maybe she saw something in you, Jebediah. Something that told her you'd help her." Jebediah scoffed. "Me? Help someone? You know, I'm not exactly known for my charitable nature." "That's just what you want people to think," Martha said, her eyes twinkling. "I know the real you, Jebediah, and so does she, I suspect." Despite his skepticism, Jebediah couldn't shake the feeling that Martha was right. Sarah had chosen his ranch for a reason, and he had a feeling he was about to find out what that reason was. He just hoped he was ready for the truth. The next few days settled into an uneasy routine. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape coated in a fine layer of red dust. Sarah kept mostly to herself in the bunkhouse, venturing out only to help Martha with chores around the kitchen. She was a hard worker, always willing to lend a hand, but she remained distant and guarded. Jebediah noticed she always ate her meals quickly and quietly, her eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. She jumped at sudden noises and seemed to flinch whenever anyone got too close. He'd catch her staring out at the horizon, her face etched with worry, as if she expected someone or something to appear at any moment. He tried to engage her in conversation, to learn more about her past and what she was running from, but she remained evasive. She'd offer vague answers and quickly change the subject. It was clear she wasn't ready to share her story, and Jebediah, respecting her privacy, didn't press her. One afternoon, Jebediah found Martha tending to the vegetable garden behind the main house. "She's not sleeping well," Martha said without preamble. "I hear her up at night, pacing back and forth in the bunkhouse. And that baby." "Baby?" Jebediah frowned. "What baby? I haven't seen any baby." Martha sighed. "She's been hiding it, Jebediah, keeping it wrapped up tight. But I heard it crying last night. A tiny little thing." Jebediah felt a surge of anger. He'd been harboring a fugitive, and she'd been lying to him. But beneath the anger, he felt a flicker of sympathy. What kind of desperation would drive a woman to hide her child? "I'm going to talk to her," he said, his voice firm. "I deserve to know the truth." Martha placed a hand on his arm. "Be gentle, Jebediah. She's been through a lot, and she's just trying to protect her baby." Jebediah nodded, his resolve tempered with caution. He knew he had to tread carefully. Sarah was clearly a woman on the edge, and he didn't want to push her over it. He needed to gain her trust, to show her that he wasn't her enemy. But he also needed to know the truth, for his own sake and for the safety of his ranch. The mystery surrounding Sarah and her hidden child was a storm brewing inside him, and he knew it was only a matter of time before it broke. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across the ranch, Jebediah walked towards the bunkhouse. He paused outside the door, taking a deep breath to compose himself. He could hear the faint sound of a lullaby coming from inside, a soft, gentle melody that tugged at his heartstrings. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated, dropping it back to his side. He wasn't sure what he was going to say, how he was going to approach the situation. He didn't want to scare Sarah, but he couldn't ignore the fact that she was keeping secrets from him. He finally knocked softly. "Sarah?" he called out, his voice gentle. The singing stopped abruptly, and there was a moment of silence. Then, he heard Sarah's voice, hesitant and wary. "Who is it?" "It's Jebediah," he replied. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" He heard her move around inside the bunkhouse, and then the door creaked open a crack. Sarah stood in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. She clutched a blanket tightly around her, her eyes wide with apprehension. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I know about the baby, Sarah," Jebediah said, his voice calm and steady. "Martha told me." Sarah's eyes widened further, and she gasped, taking a step back. "Please," she whispered, her voice filled with panic. Don't tell anyone. I'm begging you." "I'm not going to tell anyone, Sarah," Jebediah assured her. "But I need to understand. I need to know why you're hiding, what you're running from." He could see the tears welling up in her eyes, and his heart went out to her. He reached out a hand, but stopped short of touching her, not wanting to frighten her further. "Can I come in, Sarah?" he asked gently. "Just for a few minutes? I promise I won't hurt you or the baby." Sarah hesitated for a long moment, her eyes searching his face, trying to gauge his sincerity. Finally, she nodded slowly, opening the door wider. "All right," she said, her voice trembling. "But please be quiet. I don't want to wake him." "I have removed the line." Sarah began to discuss about her life, because it included text in another language, breaking the rules. The bunkhouse was small and sparsely furnished, but Sarah had made it feel cozy and inviting. A small cradle sat beside the bed, draped with a patchwork quilt. The air was filled with the sweet scent of lavender. Jebediah stepped inside cautiously, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. Sarah gestured toward the chair, her eyes still filled with apprehension. "Please sit down," she said softly. Jebediah sat, his gaze fixed on the cradle. He could see the outline of a small figure beneath the quilt. He resisted the urge to get closer, to peek at the baby. He knew he had earned Sarah's trust first. "He's sleeping," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "His name is Samuel." "Samuel," Jebediah repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "It's a good name." A silence fell between them, broken only by the gentle creaking of the floorboards. Jebediah waited patiently, giving Sarah time to gather her thoughts. He could see the struggle in her eyes, the conflict between her desire to confide in him and her fear of revealing too much. Finally, she took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice trembling. "It's a long story, Jebediah," she said, "and it's not a pretty one." "I'm listening," Jebediah replied, his voice calm and reassuring. Sarah told about her life in a small town not too far from the Bar J. She spoke of a strict community ruled by gossip and judgment. She told of a brief encounter with a cowboy passing through, a night of passion that had left her pregnant and alone. "When they found out I was pregnant," she said, her voice breaking, "they turned on me. They called me names. They shunned me. They made my life a living hell. They said I was a disgrace to the town, a bad influence on the children." "So you ran," Jebediah said softly, understanding dawning in his eyes. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I had to. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't raise Samuel in that kind of environment. So I packed up what little I had and I left." "And you came here," Jebediah finished, his gaze softening. "Why, Sarah? Why did you choose my ranch?" Sarah looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "Because," she said, her voice trembling, "I heard you were a good man, Jebediah. A kind man. And I was hoping you might help us." Jebediah looked at Sarah, at the tears streaming down her face, at the small, sleeping figure in the cradle. He saw the desperation in her eyes, the vulnerability she had tried so hard to hide. And in that moment, he knew he couldn't turn her away. He couldn't turn away from her or from Samuel. He had to help them, no matter the cost. The cowboy felt his heart grow 3 sizes that day. "I'll help you, Sarah," Jebediah said, his voice firm but gentle. "I promise. You and Samuel are safe here. No one will hurt you. Sarah looked at him, her eyes searching his, trying to discern if he truly meant what he said. A flicker of hope sparked within her, chasing away some of the fear. "Thank you, Jebediah," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Jebediah spent the next few days making sure Sarah and Samuel were comfortable. He had Martha move some furniture from the main house to the bunkhouse, making it more suitable for a young mother and child. He even rode into town and bought a rocking chair for Sarah to use while she nursed Samuel. He found himself drawn to Sarah, charmed by her gentle nature and her unwavering love for her son. He watched her as she cared for Samuel, her face radiant with joy, and he felt a pang of longing in his heart. He'd never known the love of a woman or the joy of fatherhood. One night, several weeks after Sarah's arrival, Jebediah was sitting on the porch of the main house, enjoying the cool evening air. The ranch hands were asleep, and the only sound was the chirping of crickets. Suddenly, he heard it, a baby crying. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. It was coming from the bunkhouse. Jebediah frowned. Samuel rarely cried, and when he did, Sarah was always quick to soothe him. He stood up and walked toward the bunkhouse, his heart pounding in his chest. As he approached, the crying grew louder, more insistent. He could hear Sarah's voice, trying to calm Samuel, but her efforts seemed to be in vain. He reached the bunkhouse door and knocked softly. "Sarah," he called out, his voice filled with concern. "Are you all right? Is Samuel okay?" The crying stopped abruptly, and there was a moment of silence. Then, he heard Sarah's voice, strained and anxious. "Everything's fine, Jebediah," she said. "Just a little upset stomach. We'll be all right." But Jebediah didn't believe her. He could hear the fear in her voice, the desperation to keep him away. He knew something was wrong. "Sarah," he said, his voice firm, "open the door. I want to see Samuel." There was a long pause, and then, with a sigh of resignation, Sarah opened the door. Her face was pale and tear-streaked, and her eyes were filled with terror. She clutched Samuel tightly in her arms, shielding him from Jebediah's view. "Please, Jebediah," she begged, her voice trembling. "Don't make me do this." "Do what, Sarah?" Jebediah asked, his voice softening. "What are you so afraid of?" Sarah hesitated, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Then, with a deep breath, she slowly lowered Samuel from her arms, revealing his face to Jebediah. And in that moment, Jebediah's world froze. He stared at the infant's face, his mind reeling. Samuel had a shock of dark hair, a tiny button nose, and a pair of eyes so blue they seemed to glow in the dim light. They were the exact same shade of blue as Jebediah's own eyes. He reached out a trembling hand and gently touched Samuel's cheek. The baby stirred slightly, then opened his eyes wider, focusing on Jebediah's face. A small smile flickered across his lips. Jebediah's breath caught in his throat. He looked from Samuel to Sarah, his mind racing, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. His eyes, he stammered, his voice barely audible. They're the same as mine." Sarah's tears flowed freely now, her body shaking with sobs. She couldn't meet Jebediah's gaze, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I didn't want you to find out this way," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I was so afraid." "Afraid of what, Sarah?" Jebediah asked, his voice gentle but firm. He needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. "I was afraid of what you would think," she said, her voice trembling. "Afraid you would hate me. Afraid you would turn us out." "Turn you out?" Jebediah repeated, his brow furrowed. "Why would I do that?" Sarah finally looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and desperation. "Because, Jebediah," she said, her voice barely audible, Samuel is your son." The words hung in the air, heavy and laden with unspoken truths. Jebediah stared at Sarah, then back at Samuel, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. It couldn't be true. It was impossible. And yet, looking at Samuel's face, at those familiar blue eyes, he knew, deep down, that it was. He sank back into the chair, his body suddenly feeling weak and heavy. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the reality of the situation. He had a son he knew nothing about, a son who had been hidden from him for months. He opened his eyes and looked at Sarah, his heart filled with a mixture of anger, confusion, and a strange, unfamiliar tenderness. "How?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "How is this possible? I don't understand." Sarah took a step closer to him, her eyes pleading for understanding. "Do you remember," she said softly, "a few years ago? You were passing through our town, driving cattle." Jebediah frowned, trying to recall the event. It had been so long ago, a fleeting moment in his busy life. He remembered a cattle drive, a brief stop in a small town, a night spent in a local saloon, and then a vague recollection of a woman, a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. I think I remember," he said slowly, his voice filled with confusion. "There was a woman. I don't remember her name." "It was me, Jebediah," Sarah said softly. "It was me." The pieces began to fall into place, slowly but surely. The cattle drive, the small town, the woman, the night of passion, and then the pregnancy, the ostracism, the flight. It all made sense now. "I didn't know," Jebediah said, his voice filled with remorse. "I swear, Sarah, I didn't know." "I know you didn't," Sarah replied, her voice softening. "I didn't tell you. I was afraid. I thought you wouldn't want anything to do with me, with Samuel." "But you shouldn't have kept him from me, Sarah," Jebediah said, his voice laced with a hint of anger. "I had a right to know. He's my son." Sarah nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "I know," she said softly. "And I'm sorry. I was wrong. But I was so scared, Jebediah. So scared of what you would do." Jebediah sighed, running a hand through his hair. He was still reeling from the revelation, struggling to come to terms with the fact that he was a father. He looked at Samuel, sleeping peacefully in his cradle, and a wave of tenderness washed over him. He had a son, a beautiful, innocent son. His mind flashed back to that night, years ago, in the small town saloon. He remembered the long cattle drive, the weariness in his bones, the need for a drink and some company. He remembered the woman, Sarah, her kind eyes and gentle smile offering a brief respite from the harsh realities of his life. Flashback. The saloon was dimly lit and filled with the raucous laughter of cowboys and the tinkling of a piano. Jebediah sat at the bar, nursing a whiskey, his gaze fixed on the swirling dust motes dancing in the lamplight. He was tired and lonely, his heart aching for something he couldn't quite define. A woman approached him, her footsteps light and graceful. She had long, dark hair and eyes that sparkled with warmth and intelligence. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her voice soft and melodious. Jebediah looked up, startled by her presence. He was used to being alone, to keeping his emotions guarded. But something about this woman drew him in, made him want to open up and share his burdens. "Please," he said, gesturing to the empty stool beside him. "The pleasure's all mine." They talked for hours that night, sharing stories and dreams. Jebediah learned that her name was Sarah and that she worked as a seamstress in the town. She listened patiently as he spoke of his ranch, his struggles, his hopes for the future. As the night wore on, their conversation grew more intimate, their touches more lingering. Jebediah found himself drawn to Sarah's warmth and compassion, her ability to see beyond his gruff exterior to the man beneath. They left the saloon together, walking hand in hand through the quiet streets of the town. They found themselves standing outside Sarah's small cottage, the moonlight casting long shadows across the lawn. They kissed, a long, lingering kiss that sent shivers down Jebediah's spine. He had never felt anything like it before, a deep connection that transcended words. He spent the night with her, lost in a world of passion and tenderness. For one brief moment, he forgot about his loneliness, his struggles, his fears. He was simply a man in the arms of a woman he cared for. In flashback, the memory faded, leaving Jebediah feeling a mixture of longing and regret. He had almost forgotten that night, that woman. And now, years later, he was faced with the consequences of his actions. He had a son, and he had a responsibility to both Sarah and Samuel. "I don't know what to do, Sarah," Jebediah confessed, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I've never been a father before. I don't know how to raise a child." "You'll learn," Sarah said, her voice filled with confidence. "You're a good man, Jebediah. A kind man. You'll be a wonderful father." Jebediah looked at Samuel, sleeping peacefully in his cradle, and he felt a surge of protectiveness wash over him. He wanted to hold him, to cradle him in his arms, to protect him from all the dangers of the world. But he was afraid of messing things up, of not being good enough. He spent the rest of the night tossing and turning in his bed, his mind racing with thoughts and emotions. He was angry at Sarah for keeping Samuel a secret, for denying him the chance to be a part of his son's life. But he was also grateful to her for bringing Samuel into the world, for giving him a chance to experience the joy of fatherhood. He was confused and overwhelmed, uncertain of what the future held. But one thing was clear: he couldn't turn his back on Sarah and Samuel. They were his family now, and he had a responsibility to care for them, to protect them. The next morning, Jebediah woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that he had a long and difficult road ahead of him, but he was determined to face it head-on. He walked towards the bunkhouse, his heart filled with a newfound determination. He was going to be a father to Samuel, and he was going to protect Sarah from whatever danger she was running from. He found Sarah sitting on the porch of the bunkhouse, cradling Samuel in her arms. She looked up as he approached, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Good morning," Jebediah said, his voice gentle. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Sarah replied, managing a weak smile. "Thank you for everything, Jebediah, for understanding, for not turning us away." "You're welcome," Jebediah said, his gaze softening. "You and Samuel belong here. This is your home now." He reached out and gently touched Samuel's cheek, his heart swelling with love. "He's a beautiful boy," he said softly. "He has your eyes." Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "And your stubborn chin," she added. A cloud of dust billowed in the distance, growing larger with each passing moment. Jebediah frowned, his senses on alert. He didn't recognize the riders, and he had a bad feeling about their arrival. He turned to Sarah, his voice filled with concern. "Who is it?" he asked. "Do you know them?" Sarah's face paled, and her eyes widened with terror. She clutched Samuel tighter in her arms, her body trembling. "It's them," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They found us." Jebediah's heart sank. He knew, instinctively, that these were the people Sarah had been running from, the people who had chased her out of her town. He stepped in front of Sarah, shielding her and Samuel from the approaching riders. As the riders drew closer, Jebediah could make out their faces. They were a rough-looking bunch, their eyes filled with malice and their expressions grim. They were led by a tall, gaunt man with a cruel smile and eyes that seemed to pierce right through you. The man reined in his horse a few feet from Jebediah, his gaze fixed on Sarah. "There she is," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "The Jezebel. Come back to face. Come back to face what you deserve," the man finished, his eyes narrowing. "Or are you going to hide behind this rancher?" Jebediah stood tall, his gaze unwavering. He was no longer just a lonely cowboy. He was a father, a protector, and he would not allow these men to harm Sarah or Samuel. "She's not hiding behind anyone," Jebediah said, his voice firm and steady. "She's under my protection, and so is her son." The man sneered. "Your protection? What makes you think we care about your protection? She broke our town's laws. She needs to be punished." "What law says a woman can't raise her child in peace?" Jebediah challenged, his voice rising. "What law says you can chase a woman and her baby across the country?" "It's not your concern," the man said, his hand twitching towards the gun at his hip. "Step aside, rancher. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me now," Jebediah said, his voice hardening. "Sarah and Samuel are under my roof. They're my family, and I won't let you touch them." The man's eyes narrowed, his face turning a shade of red. "You're making a mistake, rancher," he snarled. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Jebediah replied, his hand resting on the butt of his own gun. A bunch of bullies who are trying to terrorize a woman and her child. The man let out a harsh laugh. We'll see who's terrorizing who, he said, signaling to his men. Get them. The riders surged forward, their hands reaching for their weapons. Jebediah knew he was outnumbered, but he wouldn't back down. He had to protect Sarah and Samuel, no matter the cost. Martha, he shouted, his voice booming across the ranch. Get the rifle, and tell the boys to get out here now. Martha appeared on the porch of the main house, a rifle in her hands and a fierce look in her eyes. The ranch hands emerged from the barn, armed with shotguns and pitchforks. The standoff had begun. The tension in the air was thick and palpable, the threat of violence hanging heavy in the air. Jebediah knew that this was more than just a dispute over a woman and her child. It was a battle for justice, for freedom, for the right to live in peace. And he was determined to win. He wouldn't let these men take Sarah and Samuel away. They were his family now, and he would fight to protect them until his last breath. He stared down the lead rider, Silas, and waited for him to make the first move. He wouldn't be intimidated. This was his land and his family. They would not be bullied. The sun beat down on the dusty ranch yard, intensifying the already palpable tension. Jebediah stood his ground, his eyes locked on Silas, the leader of the group. Martha stood beside him, her rifle steady, her gaze unwavering. The ranch hands, though outnumbered, stood firm, their determination evident in their grim expressions. Silas surveyed the scene, his cruel smile faltering slightly. He had expected an easy victory, a quick snatch and grab. But Jebediah and his crew were putting up a fight. You're making a mistake, rancher, Silas repeated, his voice laced with menace. This is your last chance. Step aside, and we'll let you live. I'm not afraid of you, Jebediah replied, his voice steady. And I'm not going to let you hurt Sarah or Samuel. Silas's patience snapped. All right, have it your way, he snarled. Get them. The riders charged forward, their guns blazing. Jebediah and his men returned fire, the sound of gunshots echoing across the ranch. The battle had begun. Jebediah ducked behind a water trough, taking aim at the approaching riders. He fired his gun, hitting one of the men in the shoulder. The man cried out in pain and fell from his horse. Martha, from her position on the porch, provided covering fire, picking off another rider who was trying to flank them. The ranch hands, armed with shotguns, kept the remaining riders at bay, preventing them from getting too close to the bunkhouse. Sarah, clutching Samuel tightly in her arms, watched the battle unfold with terror in her eyes. She knew that her and Samuel's fate rested on Jebediah's shoulders. If he failed, they would be at the mercy of Silas and his men. The battle raged on, the air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the screams of the wounded. Jebediah and his men fought bravely, defending their home and their family. But they were outnumbered, and they were slowly being pushed back. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, a new sound echoed across the ranch, the sound of a galloping horse. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, riding towards the ranch at breakneck speed. As the rider drew closer, Jebediah recognized him. It was Old Man Hemlock, the local sheriff, and he was coming to their aid. Jebediah felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could win this fight after all. Hemlock and his men came with guns blazing. The tide was turning. Silas and his men looked worried. Their plan was falling apart. They would soon be brought to justice. Jebediah would not let them win. Not now. Not ever. His family was safe, and that was all that mattered. He reloaded his rifle and prepared for the final showdown. He was ready. He was waiting. He was going to win. With Sheriff Hemlock and his deputies joining the fray, the tide of the battle quickly turned. Silas and his men, caught off guard by the sudden arrival of reinforcements, began to panic. They were outnumbered and outgunned, their hopes of victory fading with each passing moment. Jebediah, seeing his opportunity, rallied his men and launched a counterattack. He moved with speed and precision, his years of experience as a rancher and a fighter serving him well. He used the terrain to his advantage, taking cover behind trees and rocks, picking off the remaining riders one by one. Silas, realizing that he was losing, tried to make a run for it. He spurred his horse and galloped towards the open plains, hoping to escape the onslaught. But Jebediah was too quick for him. With a swift movement, Jebediah raised his rifle and took aim. He fired a single shot, hitting Silas in the leg. Silas cried out in pain and tumbled from his horse, landing hard on the ground. Jebediah approached Silas, his face grim. He dismounted his horse and stood over Silas, his gun pointed at his head. "It's over, Silas," Jebediah said, his voice cold and hard. "You're beaten." Silas looked up at Jebediah, his eyes filled with hatred. "You haven't won," he snarled. "This isn't over. I'll be back." "No, you won't," Jebediah replied, his voice unwavering. "I'm going to make sure you never hurt Sarah or Samuel again." He signaled to Sheriff Hemlock, who stepped forward and placed Silas under arrest. The remaining riders, seeing their leader captured, surrendered without a fight. The battle was over. Jebediah had won. He had defended his home, his family, and his honor. But the victory came at a cost. Several of his ranch hands were wounded, and the ranch was in shambles. But they were alive, and they were safe. That was all that mattered. Jebediah sheathed his gun and walked towards Sarah, who was standing on the porch of the bunkhouse, clutching Samuel tightly in her arms. She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and love. "Thank you, Jebediah," she said, her voice trembling. "Thank you for saving us." "You don't have to thank me," Jebediah replied, his gaze softening. "You're my family now, and I'll always protect you." He reached out and gently touched Samuel's cheek, his heart swelling with love. He knew that he had made the right decision, taking in Sarah and Samuel. They had brought purpose and meaning to his life, filling the emptiness that had haunted him for so long. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but he was ready to face them together. He had found his family, and he would do whatever it took to keep them safe and happy. He looked at Sarah and smiled. The fight was over, and a new life was beginning. He picked up Samuel and held him close. He was home. He was safe. He was loved. And so was his son. The days that followed were filled with healing and rebuilding. The ranch hands worked tirelessly to repair the damage caused by the battle, mending fences, patching bullet holes, and tending to the wounded. Sarah helped Martha care for the injured, her gentle touch and kind words providing comfort and solace. Jebediah spent his time getting to know Samuel, marveling at his tiny hands and feet, his infectious smile, and his bright blue eyes that mirrored his own. He held him close, feeling a love he had never known before, a love that filled his heart with joy and purpose. He also spent time with Sarah, talking, sharing stories, and building a bond of trust and understanding. He learned about her dreams, her fears, and her hopes for the future. He realized that he had fallen in love with her strength, her compassion, and her unwavering love for her son. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the ranch, Jebediah took Sarah's hand and led her to a secluded spot overlooking the plains. He looked into her eyes, his heart filled with love and tenderness. "Sarah," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "I know we haven't known each other for very long, but in the short time that you've been here, you've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You've shown me what it means to love, to trust, to have a family." He paused, taking a deep breath, his eyes searching hers. "I know I'm not the easiest man to love," he continued. "I'm gruff, I'm stubborn, and I have a lot to learn about being a father. But I promise you, Sarah, I'll do my best. I'll be a good husband to you and a good father to Samuel. I'll protect you, I'll care for you, and I'll love you for the rest of my life." He knelt down on one knee, pulling a small, silver ring from his pocket. "Sarah," he said, his voice trembling, "will you marry me?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears, her heart overflowing with joy. She had never expected to find love again, to find a man who would accept her and her son, to find a home where she truly belonged. "Yes, Jebediah," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." Jebediah smiled, his heart soaring. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood up and pulled her into his arms. They kissed, a long, tender kiss that sealed their commitment to each other. From that day forward, Jebediah, Sarah, and Samuel became a family. They built a life together on the Bar J Ranch, filled with love, laughter, and happiness. Jebediah learned to be a father, teaching Samuel how to ride a horse, how to fish, and how to be a good man. Sarah brought warmth and comfort to the ranch, turning it into a home filled with love and laughter. They faced challenges along the way, but they faced them together, supporting each other and never giving up on their love. They had found their happy ending, a place where they truly belonged, free from the shadows of the past. Martha, of course, was overjoyed. She always knew Jebediah had a good heart, and she was thrilled that he had finally found someone to share his life with. She took on the role of grandmother to Samuel, spoiling him with treats and teaching him all sorts of things. The Bar J Ranch became a haven for those in need, a place where anyone could find shelter and kindness. Jebediah and Sarah never forgot what it was like to be alone and desperate, and they were determined to help others who were in the same situation. And so, the wealthy cowboy who had once been so lonely and guarded found love and happiness in the most unexpected of places. He had taken in a woman on the run, only to discover that she was hiding a baby with his eyes. And in doing so, he had found his family, his purpose, and his happily ever after. The end.